Hey friends, it's Simon Hurley from Inklips and welcome to another video. I hope you all are having an awesome day. Now today I'm going to be sharing some fun blending techniques using Nuvo Mousse to create a variety of different backgrounds. And I'm also going to use background stamps to act as sort of a resist and create a really cool effect on the cards. So let's get started. Alright, so for the first card, I'm going to share a clear resist on black cardstock with that colorful mousse. And I shared a sneak peek of this over on my Instagram stories a while ago, and this is what kind of started this whole video. So I'm going to use the Urban Skyline Bold Prints background stamp, and I'll take my Nuvo Clear Mark ink pad and ink up that whole background. And then I have the stamp side up, and I'm going to apply some black cardstock straight to that. And I'll give some nice good pressure among that whole stamp so I get a great impression. And I find that that's the best way to stamp down background stamps. So I'm going to use some Nuvo clear embossing powder here and sprinkle that over top of the whole background to make sure it's all covered. And then I'll bring in my heat tool, make sure it's good and hot, and heat set this whole background until it's nice and shiny. So that will create that resist for the Nuvo Mousse, and no matter what you put on top of this, it will come off because of that embossing powder. So this creates that nice resisted background. So once that embossing powder is all heated, I'm going to then move on to just trimming off the excess piece of cardstock. So when I'm stamping down the background and embossing, I like to leave that on so I don't burn my fingers. But once I'm done with that step, I take off that extra cardstock there, so I'm just left with that 6x6 background that I can start creating with. So after that, I'm going to start applying my Nuvo Mousse here. So I'm going to bring in a wide variety of colors and just do some really basic sponging. So I'm not adding anything to this, I'm just going in with a Nuvo blending sponge and just blending on my color here. Now the reason why I'm going in with a sponge is because you don't want to put your finger inside the jar there because it could contaminate it and cause bacteria, so you always want to pull it out with a tool. So here I'm going to go in with a variety of different colors, and I'll use one side of the sponge to blend on the color and then the other side of the sponge to blend out the colors together. And the one thing I really love about these Nuvo Mousses is they go on super vibrant, even on dark colored cardstocks like this, and they've got kind of that mica in them, so they kind of shine and really have that super bright color. So I'll bring in a rainbow assortment of colors onto this black cardstock, and it might look kind of like a hot mess now because all that embossing is getting covered up, but I'll show you how to fix that in just a second here. So I'm adding on this last color of purple, and then I think a tan kind of color in the center. And this is really buttery kind of consistency, so it really blends on nicely just by itself there. So I'll blend out that whole background just to how I like it, and then I'm going to go in with a rag and just some water here, or you could use a paper towel, and I'm just going to go over top of the surface, kind of a damp rag, not soaked, and I'm just going to wipe off that embossing powder. And since that kind of created the resist in the beginning, it'll pull off any of that excess Nuvo Mousse that was sitting on top of there, and you'll reveal the black lines with cardstock underneath. So that's the benefit of adding that embossing powder on at the beginning, and you get that really fun resist effect in the end. And I just love how this background turned out with all those colorful buildings. So once that's complete, I'm going to share how I finished off this card really quickly here by adding my sentiment on. So I just took a piece of cardstock and taped it down to make sure I was straight with those grid lines. And then I took a Yay die cut out of vellum from My Favorite Things, and I'm just going to adhere it on the center of that card. So it's almost invisible kind of in the center there, but when you tilt the card, you can kind of see that vellum showing, and it really adds a fun detail onto the card that I think it definitely needed. So once that was all dry, I then took the other congratulations sentiment and put that right on top. So for this next card, I'm going to do something very similar to the technique I just shared, but I'm switching it up a little bit with craft cardstock. So I'll take this leaf background stamp from Hero Arts, flip it over on my surface, and do the same steps that I just did. So I'll apply my Nuvo clear sticky ink, and then I'll take my paper and apply it right over top of there. So here I'm using that craft cardstock. And if you can't apply strong pressure with your hands there, another great option to get that crisp stamped image is going over top of it with a brayer, and that'll give you really nice results as well. So once I'm done with that, I'll apply my Nuvo clear embossing powder over top, and that clear ink will really hold on to that nicely. And once that's done, I'll go in with my heat tool and heat up that whole background so it turns that nice and clear and melts that powder down so that it's ready to create that resist background. So here's another fun way to do it with that brown craft cardstock showing through. So I'm going to go in and create a jungle scene with a couple different colors of green Nuvo Mousse here. Again, I'm going in with my blending sponges here, And I'm just going to apply each color in about 3 different areas around the cardstock. And this ensures that I get an even kind of color coverage across the whole thing, and I get some fun variety in the background. So I'll apply that lighter mousse and that little bit of a brighter color, and then I'll go in with a little bit of a darker color as well and blend all those nicely together by using both sides of that sponge. And when I use 3 different colors like this that are similar, they're a little bit easier to blend together. But again, it might look a little bit weird right now because some of that mousse sits on top of the surface of that embossing powder. So we'll go in just a second here and clean all that up. But I'm just going to finish blending on the mousse to the background here. So once I've done all that, I'm again going in with that same rag with a little bit of water on it, just so it's just a little bit damp. And then I'll go over top of all that embossing powder and wipe it off. And I love how these greens look against that brown craft cardstock. And I like how whatever color you put that embossing powder on, it'll take on the background color of that cardstock there. So here you can see it with that fun craft cardstock. So then I'm going to take a little monkey from Sugar Pea and I'll stamp it down with that little balloon and bananas. And I'm using some Nuvo hybrid black ink here, so I can do some watercoloring, or if you wanted to, you can color with Copic markers as well. And I'm going to go in with a brown Aquaflow marker here, and I'll just apply color here and there, and then I'll take my water brush and water it out. Now I'm not going to show a ton of coloring in today's video, but I just wanted to quickly share how I colored in this monkey, so you can get a little idea on how I colored in the rest of my images as well. Now if I want the color to be a little bit lighter or darker, I can either remove color with a rag or add a little bit more into the shadows and then blend that out with the water brush again. And I also like to work on Bristol cardstock while I work with mediums like this, because it gives you a little bit more time to blend out colors and kind of have some blending together of the colors, and gives you really nice results with coloring. So I just really quickly did all this, and then I can pop the critter right onto my card that I created. So moving on to the next card, I'm doing a similar card to the one I showed at the beginning, except this time I'm adding a little bit of water to vary up the effect. So this time I'm using an abstract skyline bold prints background from Hero Arts, and I'll ink that up with that same clear sticky ink and apply that black cardstock right over top again. And this stamp will kind of create the opposite effect. So instead of the windows being colored, the whole background instead of the buildings will be colored, and the buildings will stay that black color. So I'll heat set that whole background to create that resist again, and then I'm going to go in with these mousses here. But this time I'm taking a palette knife and I'm going to put it onto that tonic mat on the side. So this is that non-stick craft sheet kind of mat. And then I'll spray it down with some water there. And then that kind of liquidates all that Nuvo Mousse and breaks down the mousse part to it and leaves you with just that really nice pigmented watercolor. So I'll go in with my blending sponge again, pick up that color, and it really absorbs it nicely. And then I'll go in and spread that along the background. And this works super nicely because that mousse is so water reactive. Instead of going with a sponge here or anything like that, you could also go in with just a paintbrush and really organically apply the color, so you can get even more a painterly like look than I did here. But I'm just going in with those sponges again and blending on the color. And the little bit of different effect that you can see here is it's a little bit chalkier and it kind of applies differently onto the cardstock and doesn't blend as easy, but it gives kind of a different result that's almost more painterly and kind of get a different chalky kind of effect onto here. And the colors turn out a little bit different in the end too, so I encourage you guys to play with water and see kind of how it affects the mousses when you apply them on. And if you use different things like a brush to apply them, they'll also look a lot different as well. Now I found that with this purple color here, when I added that water, it really brought out a lot of that mica and kind of softened out a little bit of that color. So you want to be careful that it doesn't overpower the rest of the colors. So I brought in the rest of the colors and kind of blended them all together. So then I'll take that rag again and I'll go right over top of all this to remove any of that mousse from the top of that embossing there. And here's a quick look at that background. So you can see a different kind of effect in there, and it really does soften those colors together a little bit more. So I'll finish this card off a little bit more simple. I'm just going to apply this to a top folding card base, and then I'm going to add a quick thanks sentiment on there and keep it really simple by adding a couple sequins. So I paused it here so you can get a little bit of closer look at that fun blended background. So once that's complete, I'll move on to the next card here and really take advantage of that fun watercolor effect and really get a painterly effect with this background. So I'm using this newspaper bold prints background stamp. I'm really focusing on doing lots of backgrounds today. And I did that embossing, same thing that I've been doing, except I did it on white cardstock here. So the embossing kind of disappears into the cardstock almost on this one. But then that really creates that fun resist, so I can do this technique again with the water. So this time I just did it onto the side, onto a piece of plastic that I had laying on my desk there. But again, that matte works really nicely for this. And I'm going to spread out those colors there, and then I'm going to go in with a water brush and just soften out some of these colors. And I've got a piece of paper towel off to the side there, so if I want the color to be a little bit lighter, I can wipe it off to the side. Now the one thing I do want to point out, which is really cool with these, they're a little bit different than a regular watercolor. They do water down really nicely, but they keep that really high pigment there. So it almost spreads out kind of like a paint because it's still got that fun mica in there and that really awesome pigment that's in there. So I'll blend these three colors together. I'm using a yellow, red, and blue. And I'm just going in and applying the water to soften them down and then applying them to kind of the center of that card so I can add a little critter into there and kind of really focus the background into the center there. So I'll apply on that red paint and then I'm going to soften out the edges and really make sure they blend nicely together with more water. So once that's all dry, I'll go over top and wipe off any of that excess with my rag again, and you can see that fun color up close, and this one looks really painterly with that watercolor effect. So I took this little puppy stamp that I colored in, and I'll apply that to the center of my background, and then add the "You're the best, not fake news" sentiment onto there, and then I'll apply that right onto a card base. So that's a really fun background there. Now I know that many of my cards include critters, so I wanted to add a little bit more of a really simple and elegant effect in today's video. So again, I took a fun background stamp there and embossed this with a pearly type kind of embossing powder. So I'll heat set that onto the background. And then here I'm going to go in with a dark Nuvo Mousse in that blue color. And as I go out, I'm going to do an ombre effect to the lighter blue, but I'm going to kind of soften out the color as I go. So here I'm just doing that regular color with the blending sponge there. And I find that it looks a little bit like a hot mess here when I overlap these colors together. It looks like that lighter blue is really dominating over that darker blue color. So I didn't have a ton of hope here, but I kept applying that color with that little sponge there and just blending it all together. So you can see this outside color is really super soft there, but I'll just keep adding lots of mousse onto there. So instead of adding it randomly to the background, I like this pattern where you kind of slowly, gradually fade out with the colors there. And after I wiped it off, you can see that it kind of removed that lighter color haze from that darker color and creates that really fun effect. So now I'm going to use this Many Thanks die from Tonic, and I'm going to grab some glitter paper and go over with an alcohol marker in a dark blue color. So I'll change that silver glitter paper to match my project here. So instead of having that silver, I'll have the dark blue to kind of blend in and match the center of my cardstock that I just created there. So after I've colored that over top, I'm going to wipe off the tip with extra glitter that might have come off there. And then I'm going to die cut this out with that Many Thanks die. So I die cut it out of that glitter cardstock and cardstocks 2 other times. So I'll stack all those die cuts up to make it a little bit more dimensional. And then I'll add that glitter die cut right on top. And to make sure it's all nicely lined up, I just press my fingers around it to make sure that it's all together and sitting nicely on top of that die cut. So then I'll add some liquid adhesive and add that right into the center of the card. And you could add some sequins, but I like to keep it super simple, and that finishes off the card right there. So now I wanted to quickly share, I've been doing this on a regular craft mat this whole time. The glass mat would work really nicely, and I can't wait to get that. But for now, to clean this off, it's super simple. All I did was take a little bit of water, let it kind of soak in there because the Nuvo Mousse is a water reactive product, and then I'll wipe it off. But you could also go in with a harsher stamp cleaner or things like that to help clean that off your surface too. But I do recommend working on a glass or like an easy clean craft mat to do this as well, and that'll really clean off nicely. Well, what'd you guys think? I hope you really enjoyed that video, and if you did, please give it a big thumbs up, and don't forget to click that subscribe button down below if you don't want to miss another video like this one, and be sure that little bell icon next to the subscribe button is clicked. Unfortunately, that's the only way that you guys will get all my notifications, and be sure to never miss a crafty video like this one. Also, leave me a comment down below letting me know which card was your favorite from today's video. I'll see you guys all very soon in another card making and crafting tutorial. Bye!